when we're talking about natural materials, we have to pay attention to certain characteristics. Wood, in particular, has different characteristics that determine how we work with it. So I have a board right here that has some different details on it that we need to pay attention to when we're starting to work with a piece of wood. So a couple of things to start off with. This is rough cut. When we talk about lumber, you'll have dimensional lumber, which may look smoother, it's cut to certain measurements, etc. But then you also have rough cut lumber that might have rough edges because it's not cut to an exact size. So here, when we're looking at this piece of wood, since this is rough cut, we have some rough sawmill marks. We have a rough edge. Let me make sure if I can get this in here. So this is a rough edge from the sawmill. If you take a look at it in profile, it doesn't look completely pretty or smooth. Okay, that is something that we start taking care of. If we take a look at an end right here, we actually have a painted end, and we have the information right here. The painted end prevents moisture from escaping too fast because the wood that we use has been dried. Okay. If this cracks or checks, we end up getting a split in that piece of wood, and we can't always use that part depending on what we need. Other characteristics that will show up in wood. Right here, you have a knot. This is a part of the wood where a branch has grown into that part of the trunk. And so sometimes it's stronger, so it's tougher to work with, harder to cut through. You may decide that you want to keep that knot in your piece as a detail, but other times we need to work around them so that they don't interfere with what we're trying to do. Okay. So we have those different marks. We have different details with rough cut lumber. If we take a look at this, you'll also notice these two words, face grain. The lines in the wood are called our grain. The face of the wood, this surface, we can see more lines, we see more detail. The direction of that grain is critically important when we're thinking about how to orient a board. We're thinking about how we need to sand the board and continue with finishing. We also have 3 other grains on this material, on a piece of wood. So our face grain, this is our flat part. This is generally the widest part of the board. Then we have edge grain. An edge grain typically runs in a line along the edge, and it's on the edge, which is why it's the edge grain. We do also have the end grain. I'm not a professional videographer, but with the end grain, we get some key details. If we zoom in a little bit closer, you can see a bit of a curve. The end grain usually contains part of the rings of the tree. So we can see that curve, and it also tells us how we might need to orient this board when we are doing a glue up, which we will talk about later. Now on the end grain, we have the thickness of our board. How thick is that piece of material? When you start picking out wood in the Titan Wood Shop, you'll notice on the wall that we have some thicknesses marked. And those are key details because we'll end up using the surface planer to take off those rough saw marks and other details in getting this board to the thickness that we need for our project. Now, 2 other key dimensions. I mentioned the face grain. Our width of the board runs across the grain. Across the grain. Okay. The length of the board, right here, I'm going to back up, runs along the grain, along the line of the grain. Okay. So when we're taking a look at this piece of wood, or any piece of wood, our width of the piece runs across the grain. Our length runs along the grain. And our thickness, all these edges and ends, this is our thickness. Okay.